ミラノ派が分かればカウンセリングが見えてくる。ミラノ派第一人者、パオロ・ベルトランド先生にお聞きします。ボディランゲージについて質問します。我々はセラピールームで、クライアントの数々のボディランゲージを目撃します。このボディランゲージをどう扱えばいいですか？例えば、システム論に含むことは可能ですか？ I ask about the body language. We see a lot of body language in our client in the therapy room. How can we use this body language? For example, is it possible to include it in systemic theory?
Yes, and so the quick answer to the question is yes. Then it's more complex than just yes, of course. And the issue with body language is that from the very beginning, systemic theory was interested in two ways of communication, what they call the digital and the analogic. And digital communication is what we do with words, of course, because words are conventional. Words are there is a community decides that a word means something. But the word has no direct relationship with that something. Instead, analogic language, as Gregory Bateson said, Gregory Bateson was the first to study analogic language and to call it analogic language. What does it mean? It means that it's something that we share with other animals, non-human animals, because all animals have some way of communicate through the body, through posture, through movements, and so on and so forth. And this communication, of course, has some peculiarities. For example, I can hint at some behavior, but for example, in analogic communication, you don't have any mean to say no. I can say I want something, and I show that I want something, but it's very difficult to signal that I don't want something. So it's very complicated to do that via analogical communication. Then this means that analogical communication is very open to misunderstanding. Well, of course, you can have misunderstanding also in verbal communication, but in non-verbal communication, it's much easier to misunderstand. So what can we do with analogical communication? We can try to understand it and to basically ask questions to people. So for example, if I see something that indicates, for example, the person say, "I'm very happy to be here," but they are like that. I'm very really happy to be here. There is a discrepancy between happiness in words and total unhappiness that I can see in their body language, in their bodily behavior. And so what I do is simply I ask, you tell me that you are very happy, but I don't see your happiness. Actually, what I see, what appears to me, is that you are unhappy. So can you explain that? And usually people respond to that in some way. So what you do is you use the therapist reaction to the body language of the person in order to create new questions. Now, something that we added was the idea, at least, the idea that with nonverbal communication, we communicate emotions. So it's very, for example, in the very small examples that I made a moment before, I was talking about emotions, because of course in therapy we can talk about the emotion, but mostly in therapy people experience emotions. So because the therapy room is a very secluded space where we are free, to live our emotions without constraining them. And so they're easier to observe in the therapy room. But sometimes people are not exactly aware of the emotion they are experiencing. So what we do, we use the nonverbal communication in order to let the person know that he or she is feeling something. Because in the example that I made, for example, the person was not exactly aware of the fact that she was in some way sad or in some way unhappy or maybe shameful, and so we can begin a questioning process that must be based on our knowledge of the nonverbal expression of emotions. And for example, we all know that although the basic emotions are experienced by people more or less in the same way in any culture, then the possibility to express them, to comment of them, so the social value of emotion changes from culture to culture. And even in European cultures, what I noticed, for example, very obvious that in Southern Europe, like, in Italy or Greece or Spain, people are more openly emotional. If you move to Northern Europe, people are more constrained. So in the UK, British people tend to express less. In the Scandinavian countries, they tend to express even less. So the therapist must accommodate his or her observation of nonverbal behavior to the culture that exists, because nonverbal behavior basically is spontaneous, but it's also regulated by culture. And so I expect, for example, that in Japan there will be some emotions that are more easily expressed than others, and other emotions that should not be expressed, and so the person will be less open to recognize them. Because if the culture, Bason said, the culture standardizes emotion, and so some emotion become very big part of the culture, and other emotions are kind of refused by the culture. And so, of course, the therapist must know pretty well the emotional culture that he or she is living in order to understand people in the best way. As I said before, with nonverbal communication, there is a lot of guessing to be done. So I don't know. So it should be a genuine questioning process. Even if it seems to me that this person is having a very obvious expression, maybe what he or she means is different from what I think. But on the other hand, it is possible that this person is not exactly aware of their emotions. And so my process of questioning should aim at reaching some consensus. And then when we reach some consensus, we can work on it. So first of all, we must create consensus around the expression. So in my first example, are you sad? Are you ashamed? Are you distressed? Who knows? I begin to ask, and then we share the idea. For example, I am sad. Okay, now you are sad. How it happens that you come in here, you are sad? What happened in your world that made you feel sad? And so on and so forth. And so we try to create a connection between something that is very basic, that is the nonverbal expression, very basic, a small event in the room, and then we try to connect it to the whole system, to the whole context the person is embedded in. And so we create an awareness of the system. Of course, if we have a family or a couple, we have more than one person in the room, so we can observe how they react to each other non-verbally. One of the person is speaking, they seem very happy, and the other begins to get angry. And so this is complicated for the therapist, because it means the therapist has to observe all the people at the same time. Doing this at the same time is impossible. So what we have to do is to shift, our focus from one to the other very, very quickly. And this was one of the reasons why at the beginning of systemic therapy, there was the use of the one-way mirror, of video recording of session, because this allowed other people to see what was going on. So the therapy should not, focus on everybody because it was too complicated. The problem is today, this way of working that could be extremely useful, unfortunately, is extremely expensive too. So usually nobody can afford it. Who can afford to pay 3 different therapists to be in the same therapeutic unit with one family? It would be unacceptable. And so the therapist usually must do it by oneself. So we must develop a great sensitivity to observing changes in nonverbal expression. What's important is something to make things easier is every time we begin the session, there is some, basic tone of the session that you can feel from the very beginning. So if you are sensitive to this basic tone, there are some sessions that are quite, excited, angry, some sessions that are very quiet. And then you see a change in one of the people. This is important because it means that something is happening. So if we see a nonverbal change, we must stop the session, focus on that, and go straight to this event, because usually it means something that in the developing of the session then becomes very relevant.
Thank you. Thank you. I'd like to add some question.
Yeah.
People can lie verbally very easily, but I feel body language difficult to say lie. So I have a tendency to rely on body language more than verbal communication. Am I wrong?
No, you're right. And actually, Paul Ekman says that a good observer can detect 90% of lies just by looking at the person, whereas we can detect much less lies if we listen to what people say. And usually what you should look at, he says, is not the face, is the other parts of the body, because maybe I can maintain, like in playing cards, a poker face, but then I begin to fidget with or to move my legs and so on. And these signs mean there is something wrong going on. So, and this is something, that makes therapy in person more interesting than therapy online, because online we see people just like this and we don't know what's going on below. That may be very important.
Thank you. I'm very happy with your answer. Thank you.
Thank you.